They thought he was just a helpful kid, but they had no idea he was spying on the entire neighborhood until the footage leaked, and the HOA boy got busted. Oh. What would you do if your own neighbor's teenage son was secretly collecting evidence against you? For cash? Stay with us for this shocking story of betrayal, power, and justice inside a suburban HOA. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Sham Stories. You don't want to miss what's coming next. It all began on an unusually warm spring morning in Oakbridge, a gated community known for its pristine lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and a homeowners association so strict that even wind chimes were considered a noise violation. Jeremy Fletcher, a 17-year-old high school junior with a soft voice and a well-mannered smile, had become somewhat of a neighborhood mascot. He volunteered to water the gardens of elderly couples, helped carry groceries, and even walked people's dogs in the afternoons. Most residents thought he was just a helpful kid trying to earn some cash for college. But Jeremy's charm was far more calculated than anyone realized. Behind those polite nods and helpful hands was a secret deal between him and the HOA president, Leona Stratton, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair so tight in a bun it looked like it hurt, and an iron grip on the rules of the community. Leona ran the HOA like a private fiefdom, issuing citations for things as small as a leaf blower being used before 9 a.m. She believed that Oakbridge was a model community and that she was the reason why. But enforcement was tricky. Leona couldn't be everywhere at once, and her control was slipping. Some neighbors were pushing back, complaining about rising fines, invasive inspections, and favoritism. That's when she enlisted Jeremy not just to help with odd jobs, but to become her eyes and ears. In exchange for a scholarship fund quietly funneled through the HOA's discretionary budget, Jeremy began collecting information on specific households who violated parking rules, who had late-night guests, who spoke out at meetings, who left garbage bins visible. But it didn't stop at observation. Leona gave him a burner phone and taught him how to discreetly take photos, record conversations, and even plant evidence if needed. Jeremy had access to almost every home, under the guise of helping fixing sprinklers, picking up packages, dog walking. In truth, he was checking security camera blind spots, snapping photos of minor violations, and building case files on anyone Leona flagged. It all seemed harmless to Jeremy at first. He saw it as just another way to make money. Over time, the job became darker. He was told to exaggerate. If a neighbor left their garage door open for 5 minutes, Jeremy would report it as habitual failure to secure property. If a trash bin was left out for an extra hour, he snapped a photo, time-stamped it, and sent it in as proof of neglect. One resident, an older man named Tom Whitaker, who had recently taken issue with the HOA's misuse of funds, suddenly received 9 citations in 3 weeks. He never suspected the boy who helped him carry firewood had also planted 2 of the notices himself. Wet, rebettered, rendered after made. Tom, who had been a respected resident for over a decade, received a letter threatening lien placement for repeated violations. Enraged and confused, he requested a hearing and began gathering his own evidence. His daughter, a tech-savvy freelance photographer named Rachel, checked the timestamps on the citations and cross-referenced them with the security footage from Tom's porch cameras. What they found didn't make sense. One violation for a package left unattended didn't even match the date Jeremy had recorded. Another citation claimed Tom left a bike on the lawn overnight, and Rachel had time-lapse footage of the lawn, completely empty that entire evening. Tom brought this up at the next HOA meeting, which Jeremy also attended, sitting quietly next to Leona. When Tom demanded to know who was feeding the board this false information, Leona deflected, claiming anonymous reports were standard HOA practice. But Rachel stood up and called it out. She played the time-stamped video from her phone, projecting it onto the wall using a small mobile projector. The crowd murmured. Tom didn't just have evidence, he had irrefutable proof. And in the silence that followed, Rachel said something that made Jeremy flinch. There's someone manufacturing violations in this community, and it's not the homeowners. Jeremy kept his head down, but Rachel noticed. Over the next week, she began watching him. She checked old footage of when Jeremy had visited Tom's home under the pretense of helping with yard work. In one clip, she noticed Jeremy walking to the side of the garage and placing a folded paper near the trash bins. It matched the formatting of HOA citations. That's when she knew. Jeremy had been planting violations. Meanwhile, Leona, sensing heat, began distancing herself. She started referring to Jeremy in emails as an overager volunteer, and during an emergency board meeting, she warned the board to prepare for media involvement. The walls were closing in, but Jeremy, naive and frightened, didn't realize he was being lined up as the fall guy. Rachel didn't stay silent. She collected everything timestamps, photos, footage, and records of HOA payments and presented them to 3 other homeowners who had also received suspicious fines. One of them, a former prosecutor, saw the pattern immediately. The group formed a small committee and requested a public HOA hearing. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, almost 60 residents had signed a petition demanding transparency about Jeremy's role in HOA enforcement. Jeremy tried to deny involvement, but Rachel showed the community footage of him clearly placing a violation notice inside a mailbox, something only HOA board members were supposed to do. Leona still insisted Jeremy had acted alone, even suggesting he had become too enthusiastic and misused his access. But Rachel exposed the financial link and internal HOA document showing monthly payments marked as academic community service support, approved and signed by Leona. Jeremy had never once volunteered he was on the payroll. The hearing that followed was brutal. Residents filled the room. Jeremy sat at the end of the table, pale and shaking. Homeowner after homeowner stood up to share how he had betrayed their trust. Some cried, others shouted. One elderly woman sobbed as she recalled how Jeremy used to bring her groceries, while secretly taking photos of her backyard for minor violations. Leona didn't even attend the hearing. She sent a lawyer in her place. That lawyer tried to place all the blame on Jeremy, claiming he had taken initiative beyond what was allowed, but it was too late. Community was outraged, and the board had no choice but to suspend both Jeremy and Leona pending a full legal review. What started as a minor investigation into unfair citations had now become a neighborhood scandal. But little did they know, this was only the beginning. The news spread through Oakbridge like wildfire, not in whispers, but in bold declarations across driveways, grocery store aisles, community Facebook groups, and park benches, where retirees usually spent their afternoons talking about lawn care and dog breeds. Jeremy Fletcher, the boy they all trusted, the polite teenager who offered to mow lawns and fetch mail during vacations, had been caught red-handed as a spy for the very HOA they had grown to resent. And where's Leona Stratton, the woman many had feared but tolerated, had orchestrated the entire operation. For years, the residents had silently endured the HOA's suffocating grip under Leona's leadership, ambiguous rules that changed midweek. Sudden fines with no clear explanation, citations for invisible weeds, noise complaints filed by neighbors who weren't even home during the alleged offenses, and a system of favoritism so blatant it bordered on tyranny. The revelation that Jeremy had been weaponized against them wasn't just betrayal, it was the confirmation of every paranoid suspicion they'd swallowed for years.
What?
Quietly in his room, locked away in the upstairs corner of his parents' modest home, his phone had exploded with messages, mostly hate-filled rants, threats, and accusations. His friends at school were now ignoring him, or worse, taunting him in hallways and mocking him during lunch. His reputation was ruined. But what no one knew, not even Rachel or the residents, was that Jeremy had documented everything. Out of fear or some twisted sense of professionalism, he had recorded every conversation he ever had with Leona, had saved voice messages where she instructed him to fabricate reports, emails where she laid out exact times to visit homes, his fare, and even payment confirmations for the money funneled through the HOA's Community Youth Development Fund. These files were stored on an encrypted USB drive hidden inside a sock drawer under a false bottom. Jeremy wasn't brave, and he wasn't innocent, but he was smart enough to know that Leona would bury him to save herself. And now that she had lawyered up and pretended to be blindsided, Jeremy realized he needed leverage if he had any chance of surviving what was coming. Meanwhile, Rachel Whitaker, Tom's daughter, had become the unofficial face of the rebellion. Residents turned to her for updates, legal advice, and organization. She began coordinating with a group of homeowners who had legal or financial backgrounds, the former prosecutor, a civil litigator, and a retired forensic accountant. Together, they began investigating how deep Leona's control had gone. What they discovered shocked them. HOA meeting minutes had been altered. Financial records were edited to reflect fake vendor payments. A landscaping company listed in the HOA books didn't even exist. Its address was an abandoned post office box in another state. They found that Leona had been fining non-compliant homeowners and directing portions of those payments into untraceable community fund line items that were never used for projects. The supposed scholarship funds for Jeremy weren't the only personal benefits she had authorized. There were spa expenses, personal travel reimbursements, and even home renovation. Work on Leona's house paid for under the label of model unit upgrades. Armed with this growing pile of evidence, Rachel approached Jeremy's parents privately. She asked for a meeting, not to threaten, but to offer a way out. Mark was a proud but weary man who had worked in city sanitation for over 20 years. His wife Diana taught part-time music classes. They were honest, humble people who believed their son had just been doing odd jobs and helping the HOA president.
Ow!
When Rachel showed them the footage of Jeremy placing forged citations and explained the full extent of Leona's manipulation, Diana broke down in tears. Mark's face turned to stone. They confronted Jeremy that night, and for the first time he admitted everything. The recording, the payments, the instructions, he told them it all. He also told them about the USB drive. Rachel returned the next morning, and Jeremy, trembling but aware that this was his only shot at redemption, handed it over. Rachel copied the files, then immediately forwarded them to a trusted law firm already supporting the homeowner committee. What followed was explosive. Voice recordings revealed Leona's direct instructions. He's been complaining again. Go check the side yard and see if the trash bins are out of line. Get a photo. If not, make it look like they were. In another, she laughed and said, Tom thinks he can challenge me. He won't last a month. Get ready with the next round of fines. The USB drive included screenshots of text messages where Leona gave Jeremy exact instructions on how to approach homes, how to document violations, and how to avoid security cameras. But the worst was a recording from a private HOA executive session, never supposed to be heard by anyone outside the board, where Leona explained how to gradually pressure problem homeowners until they either left or were forced to sell. Keep the fines steady, but not too aggressive, she said. You wear them down until they give up. That's how we clean the community. With this evidence, Rachel and the committee went to the County HOA Oversight Commission within days. An emergency injunction was filed against the Oak Bridge HOA, freezing all financial activity and placing the board under investigation. Leona was served with a subpoena. Jeremy was issued a formal notice, but was also offered partial immunity. In exchange for full cooperation, the neighborhood was in uproar. Reporters began showing up outside the gates. News vans parked by the community center. Headlines like "Spy Boy Busted" and "HOA Scandal" and "Tyranny in the Suburbs" began popping up on local channels. Leona went into hiding, avoiding public statements and sending only her lawyer to speak on her behalf. But Jeremy, after weeks of silence, agreed to a recorded statement with Rachel by his side. He explained everything: how it began, why he agreed, how it escalated, and how scared he was to say no to Leona. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but he did say he was sorry. Public reaction was mixed. Some believed he was a victim, a kid manipulated by someone he trusted. Others saw him as a traitor who had spied on his neighbors for money. But either way, the real villain was now clear: Leona Stratton. In the background, a larger investigation had begun. Rachel's committee uncovered that Leona had once held positions in two other HOAs in different states, both of which had collapsed under mysterious financial trouble. She had changed her last name after a lawsuit 10 years ago and used fake references to gain leadership in Oakbridge. She was a serial manipulator, and this time the web was unraveling fast. The HOA board, under pressure from the residents and facing criminal investigation, resigned en masse. Temporary receiver was appointed to manage Oakbridge while the courts determined the legal next steps. The neighborhood was finally free, but they weren't safe yet. Rachel knew that Leona still had access to years of HOA records and contact lists. She had money, resources, and anger. And someone like her didn't just vanish. As Rachel stared at the news headline on her phone, "HOA president under criminal probe for harassment and fraud," she couldn't help but wonder what Leona was doing right now, and whether the story was truly over, or if this was just the eye of the storm. The silence that followed Leona Stratton's disappearance was not comforting. It was eerie. In the weeks after her subpoena and the collapse of the Oakbridge HOA board, the neighborhood experienced a strange kind of stillness, like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. When the air still tastes like electricity, there were no more citations, no strange notices on door handles, no clipped notes about paint shade violations or unauthorized solar lights, but neither was there closure. Rachel Whitaker could feel it. This wasn't over. She'd taken it upon herself to head the Interim Reform Committee, now officially recognized by the county's HOA Regulatory Office. She worked alongside the temporary receiver, a stern but fair woman named Cynthia Reeves, signed by the courts to manage HOA duties while investigations and lawsuits progressed. Jeremy Fletcher had moved in with his aunt in a neighboring city. Attending school under a different name for his safety, his parents had placed their house on the market, unable to face the constant reminders of their son's involvement in the scandal. Some residents still blamed him, but most directed their fury at Leona and the entire corrupt structure she had built. Still, nothing new had surfaced about Leona's whereabouts, and that disturbed Rachel more than anything else. Then came the package, no return address. It arrived at Rachel's front porch one rainy morning, wrapped in brown paper and sealed in thick tape. Inside was a plain manila envelope containing a printed stack of documents, all bearing the HOA's former letterhead, Leona's letterhead. Each page detailed a secret homeowner watch list, complete with names, addresses, and notes about their compliance behavior. There were coded rankings next to each name: R1, R2, R3. In the legends scribbled on the last page, the meanings were revealed. R1, compliant; R2, subject to pressure; R3, hostile. Where Stell's father, Tom, was listed as R3, so were 9 other homeowners, all of whom had been targeted with fines, repeated inspections, or public shaming. This wasn't just surveillance. It was organized intimidation. Rachel scanned the documents into a secure drive and called the district attorney's office, who had already opened an official case against Leona. They sent an agent to retrieve the originals within the hour, but the mystery of who sent them remained. Then Cynthia called Rachel in a panic the next day. "The HOA website," she said, her voice tense, "has been reactivated." Rachel pulled it up immediately. It had been dormant since the board collapsed, All login credentials disabled and access restricted during the investigation. Lodeno, the homepage displayed a new, ominous message in bold red letters. You can destroy a board, but not the system. We're still watching. Beneath it, a blurry black and white image was embedded, a grainy snapshot of a cul-de-sac in Oakbridge Rachel's cul-de-sac. The photo had been taken at night. Her father's truck was clearly visible. In the frame, Rachel didn't panic. Instead, she called the authorities, then ran through every home in the neighborhood known to have smart doorbells, looking for matching security footage that might show who passed through that night. A neighbor 3 houses down had video. A shadowy figure in a dark hoodie had walked along the sidewalk at 3:27 a.m., paused in front of Rachel's house, then crouched near the curb. It was impossible to see a face, but the way the person moved, purposeful, suggested this wasn't a teenager playing a prank. It was someone with intent. By now, Oakbridge residents were fed up. What had started as a scandal had become a war of nerves. Rachel and the interim committee held a town hall meeting at the community center, its first real, open, honest meeting in years. The place was packed, standing room only. Cynthia led with a report on the ongoing investigation. The financial records provided by multiple residents, including Rachel Whitaker and Jeremy Fletcher, she began, have confirmed a pattern of embezzlement, fraud, and targeted harassment spanning over 3 years. Gasps followed her statement. Rachel stepped up next, displaying the secret watch list and the HOA website screenshot. This wasn't about rules, she said. It was about control. The HOA became a weapon, and we were the targets. Then she posed the question on everyone's mind. What happens if Leona tries to come back? That question turned out to be prophetic, because just a week later, Leona Stratton made contact not through legal channels, not through apology, but through fear. Handwritten notes began appearing in mailboxes, no envelopes, no postage, just plain paper folded 3 times. Each one was different, tailored to the recipient. One resident received a note that said, "Still letting your dog bark after 8 p.m.? Watch yourself." Another got, "Missed trash pickup again. Might want to review the bylaws." Rachel received hers on a stormy Thursday night. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, Rachel. But remember, I built Oakbridge." The community exploded with anxiety. Calls to the police increased. A few families temporarily left to stay with relatives. Someone even spotted a gray sedan idling outside. The community entrance late at night, headlights off, engine running. By the time police arrived, the car was gone. That night, Rachel received a text from a blocked number. It simply read, "You shouldn't have gone through my files." At this point, the district attorney's office intensified its efforts. Leona was officially declared a fugitive after failing to appear at a court hearing and not responding to multiple legal communications. A bench warrant was issued. Her assets were frozen. A bulletin went out to all surrounding counties, but still no trace. Then something broke the cycle. A former HOA accountant came forward. His name was Albert Granger, a retired CPA who had worked with Leona during her first year as president but left quietly, citing ethical disagreements. What he brought was gold. Backup flash drives from his time in office, saved without the HOA's knowledge. Among them were hidden email threads in which Leona communicated with a third-party security company not to protect the neighborhood, but to collect footage of specific residents. Cameras placed at HOA-maintained intersections had been redirected to face individual homes. She had even requested infrared sensors to track nighttime activity. All of this had been done without consent. Worse, the security firm was unlicensed. Rachel and the Reform Committee brought this new evidence to the county and demanded immediate criminal proceedings. The Oakbridge community began formal civil action as well, filing a collective lawsuit against Leona and the former HOA board members who had signed off on her operations. The number of plaintiffs reached 43. The damage ranged from emotional distress and defamation to financial loss and home devaluation. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice. Meanwhile, Rachel doubled down on neighborhood unity. She organized weekend cleanup drives, outdoor movie nights, and a new HOA draft charter written in collaboration with residents. For the first time in years, people smiled in their driveways. Kids played on sidewalks without parents nervously scanning for clipboard-wielding spies. The community was healing, but the shadow of Leona remained. One day, Rachel received a call from a small town 2 counties over. A real estate agent named Mira recognized Leona from the news and claimed she had come into her office looking to purchase a fixer-upper under a different name. Mira had stalled the paperwork, taken copies of Leona's fake ID, and alerted the authorities. Within 48 hours, police tracked Leona to a rented cabin just outside the town border. She had dyed her hair, altered her appearance slightly, and was carrying 2 cell phones and multiple flash drives. She was arrested on site without resistance. When the news reached Oakbridge, it was met with cautious celebration. People clapped. Some cried. One elderly man baked a cake with "She's Gone" written in blue frosting and shared it with his cul-de-sac. Rachel, though, didn't celebrate right away. She waited for official charges, for confirmation that this chapter had truly ended. And when it came, fraud, harassment, abuse of authority, illegal surveillance, and Morche exhaled for the first time in months. Leona Stratton had finally been caught. But Rachel knew something others didn't. Something she hadn't yet told anyone. Among the files from Albert Granger's backup was a folder titled Future Candidates. Inside were names, people in other neighborhoods, people Leona had mentored. People who were next in line to become HOA leaders using her blueprint. This wasn't just about Oakbridge. It was a movement. And the storm, she feared, might only just be forming. The community of Oakbridge, though relieved by the arrest of Leona Stratton, began to sense that the damage she caused had not only scarred their neighborhood, but had also spread beyond its iron gates. Rachel Whitaker sat at her kitchen table, late into the night, the glow of her laptop reflecting off her tired eyes as she scrolled through the contents of the folder labeled Future Candidates. What disturbed her wasn't just the presence of other names, it was the structure. Each name had an associated neighborhood, status, influence, score, and a brief description of their leadership potential. These weren't just acquaintances. They were disciples. Individuals who had been groomed to replicate Leona's model of HOA control. Some were former assistant managers, HOA secretaries, or even volunteer coordinators who had worked under Leona in previous communities. And now, they were embedded in neighborhoods across the state, some even already holding board positions. Rachel printed everything, filed copies securely, and began contacting legal advisors. Cynthia Reeves, the court-appointed receiver for Oakbridge, was the first she alerted. Together, they began documenting a web of influence that suggested Leona's tactics were not isolated. They were systematic. Cynthia, who had seen her fair share of HOA corruption cases, admitted she had never encountered anything so coordinated. The district attorney's office added conspiracy and racketeering to Leona's growing list of charges. Meanwhile, back in Oakbridge, the rebuilding process was in full swing. The reform committee, led by Rachel and supported by nearly 2/3 of the residents, held weekly meetings in the community center. Gone were the stiff closed-door sessions with cold coffee and fake smiles. These meetings were open, transparent, and focused on inclusion. It created new voting protocols, financial transparency standards, and fair community engagement strategies. One of the most symbolic changes was the removal of the HOA surveillance poles, those slim, black columns that had blended into the landscaping but housed small cameras no one ever admitted were real. Residents cheered as they were taken down and replaced with flowering trees. Yet even as the community celebrated small victories, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking beneath the surface. Her instincts were proven right when she received an email from someone using the alias HOA Patriot. The message read, "They're already here. Leona's network doesn't end with Oakbridge. She had plans for 7 more communities, including yours. I have files, but I can't send them over email. Meet me." Attached was a photograph of an old HOA newsletter from a different city, Cedar Hollow, where the name Diana Grant appeared as HOA secretary. Rachel's heart sank. That was one of the names in the Future Candidates file. Diana had served as a volunteer coordinator in Oakbridge 4 years ago, then moved. If this was real, Leona hadn't just created a corrupt board. She had built an HOA empire. Cynthia advised caution, and Rachel agreed. Involved a trusted investigator, a private firm that specialized in white-collar conspiracy cases. A meeting was arranged with HOA Patriot in a public cafe in the neighboring city. The man who arrived was in his late 40s, nervous but deliberate. He introduced himself as Nolan, former HOA treasurer for Cedar Hollow, and said he'd worked closely with Diana Grant before resigning. According to Nolan, Diana followed a playbook similar to Leona's, targeting residents quietly, layering fines, reshaping bylaws to give the board unchecked power, and recruiting young assistants to spy and report violations. It's not just about rules, he explained. It's about control, property leverage, and eventually displacement. They make people miserable until they sell into their associates by the properties at lower value. Rachel was stunned. Nolan handed her a USB drive containing emails, recorded calls, and scanned documents from Cedar Hollow. As they walked to her car, he added, "I tried to expose her, but she buried me in lawsuits. I'm glad someone like you finally took one." Down. Back in Oakbridge, Rachel shared the findings with the committee. The implications were terrifying. HOA abuse wasn't just a local issue. It was an organized system spreading like rot through the foundation of neighborhoods across the region. Rachel compiled all the evidence, Oakbridge files, Cedar Hollow documents, and Nolan's testimony, and presented them to the district attorney. Within 2 weeks, subpoenas were issued to board members across 3 additional communities. Arrests followed. HOA properties were seized. Residents in those areas reached out to Rachel, grateful for her bravery and guidance. Oakbridge, once known for its rigid rules and hostile board, became a model of HOA reform. The local news dubbed Rachel the neighborhood reformer, and she was invited to speak at a regional housing conference about transparency and community governance. Yet Rachel remained grounded. She hadn't forgotten the pain of betrayal, the fear of surveillance, or the long nights of anxiety. She knew that while Leona was behind bars, others like her were still out there, cloaked in professionalism, hidden behind bylaws, manipulating documents, and wielding power through intimidation. Jeremy Fletcher, now living under a quiet rehabilitation program, reached out through his lawyer. He wanted to apologize in person. Rachel agreed. They met in the same community center where the scandal had first exploded. Jeremy looked different, older, somehow more aware. He handed her a letter and said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you for not destroying me when you could have." Rachel read the letter. It was raw, honest, and detailed his realization of the damage he'd caused. He also provided more context how Leona had promised him recommendation letters, introduced him to private college consultants, and assured him she'd take care of everything if he just helped clean up the community. It was emotional. Rachel thanked him for coming forward and reminded him that while he was manipulated, he still had a responsibility to make things right. Jeremy nodded. Before leaving, he added, "You weren't just the one who caught me. You're the one who gave me a chance to change." That night, Rachel sat under the stars in her backyard, the same yard Jeremy had once secretly photographed. She listened to the wind rustling through the new trees planted by the Reform Committee, and she finally let herself believe that Oakbridge had changed. The old fear was gone. Neighbors waved instead of whispering. Children played freely. Most of all, people freely talked about the kind of community they wanted to live in. Rachel knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew they'd won something priceless: awareness, strength, and the courage to never be silent again. Months passed, and the scars left behind by Leona Stratton's reign over Oakbridge began to heal. But the memories never fully faded. The HOA had become more than just an administrative body. It was now a community-led council where every homeowner had a voice, and Rachel Whitaker remained its guiding force. Under her leadership, Oakbridge underwent a complete transformation. Every HOA policy was rewritten with fairness, transparency, and accountability at its core. Committees were formed for everything: maintenance, safety, social gatherings, and each committee required rotating members to prevent the kind of stagnation and unchecked power that had once allowed Leona to thrive. The cameras were gone, replaced by community watch volunteers trained not to spy, but to assist. The front office was no longer locked to residents, and all financial records were publicly displayed online. With monthly town hall summaries printed and delivered to every home, but despite the progress, the consequences of what had happened echoed in unexpected ways. Rachel would often wake at night thinking she'd heard a knock or imagined seeing a figure outside her window. It wasn't fear anymore, it was caution. A survivor's instinct that never quite left. The exposure of Leona's sprawling influence hadn't stopped with Cedar Hollow. Investigations spread into 2 neighboring counties, revealing other HOA officials linked to her methods, people who had used her system of control to push families out, lower property values, and quietly resell homes to investors. It was bigger than any of them had imagined, but it was falling apart piece by piece. Thanks to the information Rachel had helped uncover. One day, while walking through the local farmer's market, Rachel was approached by an older woman she didn't recognize at first. The woman introduced herself as Clara Jennings, the former HOA president of an out-of-town community who had recently stepped down voluntarily. Clara confessed that after seeing news reports of Oakbridge and the scandal, she had reviewed her own board's behavior and realized how close they had come to adopting the same oppressive practices. "I just wanted to say thank you," Clara said, her eyes welling up. "You saved more than just your neighborhood." Rachel thanked her, but remained humble. She knew she hadn't acted alone. Every whistleblower, every neighbor who spoke up, every resident who dared to demand better had contributed to the change. But she also knew something deeper. Power, when left unchecked, could rot even the best intentions. She promised herself she'd never let it happen again. In a twist of fate, Jeremy Fletcher's story took a quiet but remarkable turn. Community service, therapy, and mentorship. He began speaking to youth groups about the dangers of blind trust, manipulation, and the importance of accountability. He enrolled in community college, focusing on law and ethics, and sent regular updates to Rachel, who quietly followed his progress. He didn't ask to return to Oakbridge, and Rachel never suggested it. But in one of his messages, he wrote, "I hope one day I can be the kind of person this community would have been proud of." Jeremy wasn't forgiven by everyone, but he wasn't forgotten either. His story remained a powerful reminder that anyone, regardless of age or charm, could be used as a pawn when power demanded silence. One fall morning, a letter arrived for Rachel from the State Housing Commission. It wasn't a complaint or an alert, it was an invitation. They wanted her to join a new task force focused on reforming HOA governance standards statewide, using the Oakbridge model as a blueprint. Rachel was stunned. From being just a resident fighting against injustice, she had become the voice for thousands across the state who had suffered in silence under corrupt boards. She accepted. In her first meeting, she spoke plainly. Power is not the enemy. Silence is. We allowed abuse to thrive because we believed the rules were more important than the people. That ends now. Back in Oakbridge, life was simpler again. Families gathered in the park for barbecues, kids rode bikes without fear of secret citations, and for the first time in years, neighbors trusted each other. Every time Rachel passed the place where she had first confronted Jeremy, where the lies had unraveled, she felt not anger but resolve. The community was no longer afraid. They were aware, vigilant, stronger. They had taken back their neighborhood from the shadows, not just by tearing down the tyrant, but by choosing to rebuild it together with integrity and compassion. Rachel knew there would always be another HOA Karen out there, another Leona waiting to rise, and perhaps even another Jeremiah, confused, used. But now the community knew how to spot it, how to stand up, and how to fight back with truth and unity. The HOA boy had been busted.
I buy that.
Tyrant had been exposed, but more importantly, the people had risen. And in that, there was hope. If you were moved by this story, if you've ever been targeted or silenced, or if you just believe in the power of standing up for what's right, then join the movement. Subscribe to Sham Stories for more true HOA drama, community justice, tales and eye-opening confrontations that prove no one is above the rules and no voice is too small to make a difference.